All he needed was a glimpse of you and a bullet. The Vietnamese soldier's worst nightmare wasn't heavy firepower or massive troop formations. It was a single man concealed in the shadows, patient, relentless, and lethally skilled. In Vietnam, the going rate for killing an American sniper was about $8. For some, it climbed a little higher, a few hundred, in rare cases a couple of thousand. For one man, the enemy put up 30,000. In today's money, something close to $250,000, the largest bounty placed on any sniper in the entire war. You would expect a man with that kind of price on his head to vanish, to change his habits, to do everything he possibly could to become invisible. He did the exact opposite. He kept a single white feather tucked into the band of his hat, right where anyone could see it, almost as if he were daring them to come and find him. His name was Carlos Hathcock. The enemy called him Lông Trắng, white feather. And the question this video is going to answer scene by scene is a simple one. What does a man have to do to make an entire army decide he is worth more dead than a whole unit of ordinary soldiers? Over the next few minutes, you are going to meet the boy who taught himself to shoot in the woods of Arkansas, the marksman who turned the worst terrain on earth for a sniper into his personal hunting ground, and the duel that sounds far too perfect to be true until you understand the cold physics behind it. And you are going to see how the most feared hunter of the war ended his story not as a killer at all, but as something else entirely. To understand the legend, though, you have to start with the man, because he was not born a soldier. Carlos Norman Hathcock II was born in Arkansas in 1942, and he grew up poor, with a rifle in his hands long before he ever put on a uniform. As a boy, he hunted to help put food on the table, and in doing it, he learned the things that no shooting range can ever teach: how to wait, how to read the wind and the light, how to go so still that the animal in front of him forgot he was there at all. Patience, stillness, and an almost unnatural calm under pressure. These were not skills the Marine Corps gave him. They were skills he carried into it. So when he volunteered, went to war, and found himself operating around a place called Hill 55, south of Da Nang, he discovered that everything he had learned as a hungry kid in the woods translated with terrible precision to hunting men. And he was, by any measure, extraordinarily good at it. The official records credit him with 93 confirmed kills. But there is something you need to understand about that number. To count as confirmed, a kill had to be witnessed and verified by a third party, an officer, on top of the sniper's own spotter. In the chaos and cover of the jungle, most of the time that was simply impossible. Hathcock himself put his real total somewhere between 300 and 400. So the famous 93 is not the ceiling, it is the floor. But I want to be careful here, because the number of men he killed is honestly the least interesting thing about him, and fixating on it misses the entire point. Hathcock never spoke about his work the way you might expect a killer to. He said over and over that he did it so that more of his fellow Marines would get to go home. Hold on to that line, because it is the thread that runs through this whole story, all the way to the way it ends. The white feather was the heart of the legend. He wore it openly, and the enemy came to know it and to fear it. The communists placed that $30,000 price on his head specifically, an astronomical sum for the time, and the order went out to find the Marine with the white feather and kill him. And here is the detail that tells you everything about the men he served with. Rather than let him stand alone as a target, other Marines in his area began wearing white feathers of their own. They turned themselves into decoys, deliberately making themselves into bait, so the enemy could never be sure which white feather belonged to the man worth a fortune. Think about what that actually means. These men were willing to draw fire onto themselves by pretending to be him. You do not earn that kind of loyalty by being a good shot. You earn it by being the kind of man other men will step into danger to protect. Now, to understand why his marksmanship became the stuff of legend, you have to understand where he was doing it. Because the jungle is about the worst place on earth to be a sniper. Picture the open battlefields where most famous sharpshooters built their reputations. Long, clear sight lines, fields and ridges where a target might be spotted hundreds of meters out. Vietnam offered almost none of that. The vegetation was so dense it swallowed sight lines whole. A man could be invisible at 30 meters. Most fighting happened close, fast, and ugly. A genuinely long shot, the kind a sniper dreams about, was a rare and nearly impossible thing because there was usually nowhere to take it from and nothing you could see clearly enough to hit. That is the context you have to keep in mind. In an environment that strangled long-range shooting, Carlos Hathcock did things with a rifle that should not have been possible. And the most famous of them began when the enemy decided bounties alone were not working and sent a specialist to finish the job. According to the account told in his biography, the North Vietnamese brought in a master sniper of their own, a man the Marines came to call Cobra, with a single mission: kill the white feather. Cobra began the way a patient hunter does. He started killing Marines around Hill 55, picking them off one at a time, not at random but as bait, to draw Hathcock out of the relative safety of the base and into the open where the two of them could settle it alone. Hathcock understood exactly what was happening, and he went out anyway because that was the job. What followed, as the story goes, was an entire day of two of the most dangerous men in the war hunting each other through the same stretch of jungle. Each one knowing the other was out there. Each one moving inches at a time, reading the ground, waiting for the single mistake that would decide it. And then, late in the day, Hathcock saw it. A flash, a glint of sunlight bouncing off glass somewhere in the green. He did not hesitate. He fired at the flash. And when they recovered the enemy sniper, they found that Hathcock's bullet had passed straight down the barrel of Cobra's telescopic sight and into his eye. Now sit with the logic of that for a second, because it is the most chilling part of the whole thing. For a bullet to travel cleanly through the scope and into the eye behind it, Cobra had to be looking through that scope at the exact instant Hathcock fired, which means Cobra was lining up his own shot on Hathcock in that very same moment. They had found each other at the same time. Hathcock simply fired a fraction of a second sooner. And a fraction of a second was the entire difference between the man who walked home and the man who did not. I am going to stop for just a moment to ask you something directly, because stories like this one only survive if people choose to keep them alive. If you have made it this far, do two quick things right now. Subscribe and drop the words white feather in the comments. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm to push this man's story in front of someone who has never heard it. That is the whole deal. Now let me show you the shot that put Hathcock into the record books, because the duel with Cobra was not even the most improbable thing he ever did with a rifle. For most of the war, the practical reach of a sniper was measured in hundreds of yards. Hathcock decided that was not nearly far enough. He took a heavy .50 caliber Browning machine gun, a weapon built to tear apart trucks and aircraft, and he mounted a telescopic sight onto it, turning a crew-served machine gun into the largest sniper rifle anyone had ever fired. With it, he recorded a confirmed kill at 2,460 yards. That is nearly 1.5 miles. The shot was so far beyond what anyone believed possible that the record stood for decades, all the way until a Canadian sniper finally broke it in Afghanistan in 2002, more than 30 years later. Hathcock did not just make an impossible shot. He built the tool to make it with. That was the kind of mind he had. Restless, practical, always hunting for the edge that would keep his men alive and the enemy guessing. His most famous mission of all comes with a warning, and I want to be straight with you about it, because that honesty is the whole point. This one comes from the account in his biography, written by Charles Henderson, and by its very nature it is almost impossible to verify independently, since missions like it left no public record. So I am telling it to you the way Hathcock and his biographer told it, as the legend it became, not as hard fact. The story goes that he was sent to kill a senior North Vietnamese general, and that to reach him he had to cross more than 1 kilometer of open ground, alone with no cover, knowing that to be seen even once meant death. So he crawled, not for minutes, not for hours, but for days, moving at a pace measured in inches, sometimes a single foot in an hour, sleeping where he lay, letting insects crawl over him without so much as a flinch, because the smallest unnatural movement would have ended him. At one point, the story goes, an enemy soldier nearly stepped on him, and still he did not move. He reached his firing position, took the one shot, and then began the same agonizing crawl back out. Whether every detail happened exactly that way, we cannot fully know. But it captures something that is unmistakably true about the man. His real weapon was never the rifle. It was a patience so complete it bordered on inhuman. And that brings us to the part of the story the other tellings so often forget. The part that turns Carlos Hathcock from a legend back into a man. On the 16th of September 1969, he was riding on top of an armored vehicle when it struck a landmine. The blast tore it open and set it on fire, with Marines trapped inside. Hathcock, already badly burned himself, did not get clear and stay clear. He went back into the flames again and again and pulled 7 men out of that burning vehicle before he finally collapsed. The burns he suffered were severe, and they effectively ended his career. The most feared marksman of the war was finished in the end not by Cobra, not by the bounty, not by any of the men sent to collect it, but by a mine, a fire, and his own refusal to leave anyone behind. Think back to what he always said, that he did all of it so his fellow Marines could go home. In those last seconds on that burning vehicle, he proved it in the most literal way a man can, with his own skin. The recognition came slowly, far too slowly. The Silver Star for pulling those 7 men out of the fire was not awarded to him until 1996, almost 30 years after the act itself. By then, he was already a sick man. He had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and the disease steadily stripped away the steady hands and the iron self-control that had defined his entire life, and yet his influence outlasted his body. Earlier in his career, he had been central to building the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico and shaping its course, leaving a mark on how American snipers were trained for generations after him. He died in 1999 at just 56 years old. The deadliest hunter of the war spent his final years inside a body that would no longer obey him. And yet the image that lasts is not the kill count, and not the bounty, and not even the impossible shots. It is the picture of a man walking into a fire for 7 others. That is the destiny hidden underneath the legend. He hunted so that men could go home, and when it mattered most, he carried them out himself. That instinct to endure anything so the men beside you survive was not unique to Carlos Hathcock. It ran like a current through the whole war, in men whose names are even less known than his. There was one soldier who took it to a place that almost defies belief, who fought on through wounds that should have killed him many times over, for 6 straight hours, refusing to go down until everyone else was safe. If you think what Hathcock did in that fire was the limit of what one man will endure for his brothers, wait until you meet him. That is the story we are telling next.